base with our assignment and give you guys some sort of introduction to what's being expected of you. I'm going to start by watching a video, which we'll get to in another discussion board. But for this, I just want to touch base on what's being expected because it might be helpful for you guys all to get a sense of what's being required. We didn't really get that deep into it before you left. So here's where we're at again. As a refresher, you need a 1,750 to 2,000 word proposal on a topic that somehow relates to the internet. We've talked a lot about topics. We'll be going through your invention papers over the next week or so, and you guys should be able to know whether or not your topics are appropriate. The TED conference thing will come into play later, but your paper should be academic. The voice and style should be aimed at not just editorial readers, but who is my audience? So we can ignore a lot of that language and just say, who is my audience? If you're speaking to business leaders, then we need a business style tone, a business style stance. From there, you're going to actually be directing it to those people. So as we talked about from the Invention Week, you need to have identified a problem and analyze that problem. That's the hope. If you did the invention paragraph that we talked about in class, then you know what your intro should be. You know a lot about the problem now. You know who you're going to be pitching it to. And so you have to start with persuading your audience that it's a problem. That might be a big task. For example, if you're talking to business leaders about sustainability issues, they won't want to hear environmental arguments for the most part. They want to hear arguments about business. So we could talk to them about public perception. We could talk to them about the loss of revenue. We could talk to them about divestment. These are all avenues for us to engage them in what the problem is for them. Once we've done that, we've convinced them it's a problem. We then need to give them a proposal. Again, that proposal needs to be geared towards that audience, not geared towards just about everybody. And so once we've started this process, it really begins to outline itself. One of the big pitches I've been making to you guys all year is the idea that you're the ones who determine everything from the outset. I give you this sort of generic assignment, but by defining what the problem is and by defining what the proposal is, that's what you're doing. You're establishing the criteria for me. And we'll go over the rubric in a later videos when we get to peer review, but I just want to make sure you guys see that this is not different from other things we've done. It's just a different genre. Once we've done that, you then analyze the what, how, and why. The what do we need to do? How do we do it? Why do we do it? And we'll get into that when we talk about body paragraphs in a later video. The other things that we need to make sure we do is 7 to 10 academic sources. And as I've said before, the only measure of academic sources that's really appropriate here, that's binary so that we don't have these issues of I thought it was appropriate, is peer review. So 7 to 10 peer-reviewed sources. That doesn't limit your source count to 7 to 10, but it does mean that you have to have the 7 to 10 sources on your references page and cited throughout the paper. So once we have that idea, we can begin to move through this. Today we're just going to be talking about the intro, but we have to keep this system in mind, that all of this is meant to build up to something. So we start with the intro. We need to know about this intro. What are we doing here? How does it work? So we have to remember that our intro here is all about a problem. And so we have to start by, again, understanding how we pitch that problem to our audience. We start by understanding who that audience is. I've talked about proposals needing a great deal of compassion. What I meant by that is you have to understand the logics that are being employed by your target audience. By understanding that, we can then put it into the rhetorical triangle. We can understand, like, what do I need to do or say to make myself credible to them? If I use the wrong logics, if I talk to a business leader about sustainability without talking about the issues that they care about, I'm not going to be very credible to them. Similarly, by talking about issues they care about, I'm also being very emotionally driven. That's going to build pathos for me. And by speaking to them logically in the logics they want, by talking to a business leader about the business prospects and the business side of their dealings, their profit margins, their public perception, all of those things that they care about, As long as I speak about it logically, then I'm going to satisfy logos as well. And so this is really what's happening here. And the intro really sets the stage for that. By really giving that problem presence, you're establishing your credibility by saying, look, I know this may not be an issue you think about right now, but it is an issue that needs to be thought of. And here's why. You're using the things that they care about to prove that that's something they should care about. So we do this by going through this intro model. We start by defining the problem. This could be more generic. I want to talk about sustainability. I want to talk about forestry. It doesn't matter. We just talk about the generic problem, but we want to very quickly get to the problem from the stance of our audience. That's why we talk about the root of the problem. What is the root of the problem for our audience? So if we're going to talk about sustainability issues, we might want to quickly get to divestment or to public perception, because those are going to be issues that will affect profits. And now all of a sudden we've hit the power word for business leaders, profit. And by making that stance and taking that aim, we can now move much more quickly through our intro and get them to our proposal. So we want to then define any key terms we have. What do we mean by sustainable? Sustainable is a weird word today because many people think it's about environmentalism, but sustainability can be talked about in business as well. How do we make a sustainable business model? That's a big question, especially in light of, as our discussions have sort of centered around Clayton Christensen's books, by identifying what sustainability even means in a large business model and how they get disrupted from below and how the innovation dilemma really strikes home to them. You can really make a sustainability question very, very prominent for a business leader. And if you wanted to do that from an environmental standpoint, you could do it from an environmental standpoint and say, the real problem is that your innovations are not sustainable. They're requiring so many resources that it's going to get incredibly much more expensive to your customers, but someone is going to out-innovate you, and they're going to start taking away the customers you care the least about. And so we can definitely still build that argument, and then we get to our proposal. What is it that we're telling our audience to do? That is the crux of your proposal. So all of this needs to go into the intro, and that's the first thing we're going to work on here. And remember, something I've told you guys before is that the entire paper starts with research, but the first thing we have to identify and write is our thesis statement. Once we identify our thesis statement, it will, in a proposal, identify who our audience is, because we'll know who can do that change. It will identify what we need to do in terms of how we address the problem, how we bring the problem to them, how we pitch that as a problem and make them care about it. How do we give it presence for them? So that's why the proposal, or the actual thesis of the proposal, has to come first. If it doesn't come first, it can create significant issues, as we've talked about before, where your intro is really generic or where you never really get me to a thesis. So this is the way to really bypass that, by identifying all of these things before you start writing. And then first thing you do, what am I proposing and who am I proposing it to? So that's our first part of this assignment, and we'll get to what you guys are going to be posting in the discussion boards. If you have questions, of course, just email me. Otherwise, I hope you are moving forward with this right